Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. The rush of racing? Nothing beats it. But Chumba Casino comes close. Chumba's got fast spins, fun games, daily bonuses, and all the action you can handle. Now that's a ride. Ready to hit the throttle? Get in the driver's seat and head to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
There's a million things to stress about when flying. Overweight luggage, TSA lines, delays, overpriced airport lunches. Your rental car shouldn't be one of them. With Avis First, your rental comes with a personal concierge who meets you at arrivals, hands you the keys to a premium car, and refills it for you at market price when you're done. You've rented before, but trust me when I say you've never rented quite like this. Welcome to Avis First. Visit avis.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the life and crimes of serial killers throughout time. I'm James Whitaker, and with me is the ever insightful Dr. Emily Carter. Today, we're diving deep into the dark biography of Samuel Little, America's most prolific serial killer, at least by the numbers. Before we begin, I would like to invite you to like and subscribe to the show if you are able. Some of you may also see a donate button, and if you are able to donate a couple of bucks to the show, we would be very grateful. We are still a new show, and any support we get from our listeners means the world to us. Also helps us keep creating new content for you. I would also like to point out that there is a certain haunted museum in Vegas that is currently in possession of Samuel Little's remains. Just a neat fact I thought I might share before we get started. With that, let us get into the subject of today's episode. Emily, I have to say, the more I dig into Little's background, the more it reads like a parade of red flags that just got ignored for decades.
It is, isn't it? From birth, really, you know. He was born Samuel McDowell in Reynolds, Georgia, 1940. And the instability started right off the bat. His mother, Bessie May, was apparently incarcerated when she had him, and then left him with his grandmother in Ohio. He didn't have any of the grounding influences children need. Not that this ever justifies what he did, but it certainly lays a psychological groundwork for risk. I feel like this is a common theme with some of the serial killers that we have covered. I mean, look back at the last show with Dahmer.
Not exactly the same, but there are some similar events happening as far as drug use and abandonment. And even early on, he showed these dark fantasies about strangulation. Kind of chilling stuff, especially his own accounts, claiming he became obsessed just watching his kindergarten teacher touch her neck. Most kids they don't take that sort of detail in and then turn it into something sinister.
Exactly. When we look at high-risk offenders, so often we see that pattern. Childhood trauma, neglect, fractured attachment, early obsession with violence. With Little, it's almost textbook. I don't like that word, nothing about this is textbook, but it does fit the research really well. He even started collecting true crime magazines as a teenager, seeking out stories and images of strangulation. It was almost like he was rehearsing psychologically for what came later.
You know, I always think about how many opportunities society has, theoretically, to step in at these early moments, and yet so rarely does. But let's move to how all these factors transitioned into outright criminality.
Yes, so by the mid-1950s, Little was already in trouble, sent to juvenile detention for breaking and entering in Omaha. His criminal record just grew from there. By 1975, he'd racked up arrests in 11 states for things like armed robbery, assault, fraud, you name it. And the pattern of moving state to state is something we see with serial offenders. It makes them so much harder to pin down. I wish that he had been given harsher sentencing for these crimes, and someone in the justice system had seen what this was leading to.
The loss of life because of the missed warning signs is staggering.
Right. And here's a detail I find kind of fascinating. While he was serving time, he picked up boxing. This detail matters because you look at his later crimes, and he often used a single knockout punch to subdue his victims. There's no mistaking the influence there. And I've actually come across some of my old Florida police radio logs. In the late 70s, they logged unsolved attacks that, in hindsight, feel eerily familiar. Can't say for sure it was Little, but the profile fits.
It's remarkable, James. It's these sorts of details, him learning skills or absorbing information in prison, that feed his later patterns. And, of course, every arrest seemed to just be another stop-off. Nothing that ever stuck long enough to stop him.
Classic case of someone falling right through the gaps. And each time he's out, he's a bit more experienced and a bit more dangerous. It's a nightmare recipe, honestly. But how he targeted victims is, I think, one of the most critical elements to understand.
Absolutely, and this is a really tough one. Emotionally, I mean. Little deliberately chose people on the margins. Sex workers, drug users, transgender women, folks without stable housing or strong social ties. He really did, that their disappearances likely wouldn't set off any alarms. In his own words, he targeted those for whom he thought no one would account.
The striking thing, he'd knock them unconscious with a punch, that boxing background, and then strangle them. And strangulation, unlike stabbing or shooting, often leaves very little overt evidence, especially if the body isn't found right away. You remember the Miami case, 1971 or so? Little's confession details, picking up Mary Ann, a transgender black woman, and ultimately dumping her body in a swamp. Her remains were never found. It's like he just disappeared victims into thin air.
There's this almost systematic calculation there. He knew what would get overlooked and he exploited it. And it's a pattern that makes his crimes so painfully difficult to investigate, even years later.
And when you add in his ability to travel and choose vulnerable people whom the system failed to protect or even notice, it becomes clear how he was able to keep going, almost unchecked, for decades. Let's dig into exactly how those red flags were missed.
So, looking at the 70s and 80s, this is when that pattern set in. Little moving restlessly from city to city, and alleged murders stacking up from Miami to LA. But no homicide conviction. Not even once through that stretch. Like you said, his methods, strangulation with minimal trauma, and targeting marginalised women, led coroners to list many deaths as drug overdoses or accidents. There just wasn't the institutional will to dig deeper for these victims.
And I gotta say, it's infuriating. You see coroners, police, whole departments essentially turning away. One case after another ruled accidental. I reviewed Chicago cold case files for a story years ago. So many women, all living on society's edge, whose deaths were written off. Little's case is just the most tragic example of that bias. Would things have been different with different victims? Probably. It's an uncomfortable truth.
It's devastating, but important to face. When we don't value all lives equally, serial offenders take notice. Their crimes become easier, and they know it. The research is clear, but the outcome for Little's victims was anything but theoretical.
Yeah, and that lack of urgency from authorities absolutely paved the way for what came next. Let's talk about those early crime investigations, the names, the survivors, the near misses. Some names from those early files. Melinda Laprie, Patricia Ann Mount. They pop up a lot in the records. But time after time, faulty eyewitnesses, uncertain testimony, or just plain disbelief in survivors led to botched cases or dropped charges. Think about Lori Barros. She survived Little's attack in San Diego, identified him in court, and yet he slipped through. It's wild. In my Chicago archive work, I came across the same frustration. Cases dropped because a witness couldn't quite nail down details under pressure or didn't seem, credible enough to a jury.
It's infuriating, really. You have survivors brave enough to identify their attacker in court, but because of, say, their background or the context of the attack, they're dismissed. Little was buoyed up by that lack of belief. He learned, in a very real sense, that he could get away with it, over and over. And I think by the late 80s, he was genuinely emboldened by the failure of the system to stop him.
And it gets worse. He was released from prison in 87 after kidnapping and beating 2 women. Just got up and left and went right back to the murder trail. No pause. The sense of impunity must have been overwhelming for him.
Absolutely. And only when DNA technology finally caught up did the tide begin to turn. Which leads to that 2012 breakthrough.
Yeah, this is a huge turning point. In 2012, Little gets picked up on a drug charge in Kentucky. Nothing heroic, just regular police work leading to a random arrest. But they archive his DNA. Finally, we enter the modern forensic age, and boom, his DNA matches to 3 cold case homicides from the late 80s in Los Angeles. Suddenly, all those patterns people had speculated about, all those hunches, are grounded in hard evidence.
You know, it's almost surreal how many years he'd been able to kill with impunity, and then it's a basic DNA swab that cracks the case. After the LA cases turned up positive, the LAPD started collaborating with the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. That opened the floodgates. VICAP started lining up his whereabouts with hundreds of cold cases nationwide, connecting those dots that'd been floating in the dark for so long. And that changes with DNA. It doesn't care where you are or who you are. Once you're in the database, the truth has a way of catching up. For Little, it meant the game was finally up, at least in legal terms.
Once Little was finally cornered, the confessions just poured out. Between 2018 and 2019, with the help of a Texas Ranger and the FBI, Little described 93 murders covering 19 states. The scale is almost unfathomable. FBI analysts found his confessions so detailed he remembered things like the shape of a victim's face, the make and color of his car, or the street layout. But interestingly, he'd often blank out on dates. That's odd, isn't it?
Not as odd as you might think, James. In psychopathy research, we see this split in memory, crystal clear sensory impressions, places, objects, faces, cars, but fuzzy sense of time. Episodic memory in people with certain neuropsychological traits really can be that skewed. What matters is his recitations lined up with known disappearances and cold cases. Which is why the FBI now considers over 60 of his confessions confirmed, and the rest, well, still painful mysteries.
And it's worth mentioning that some bodies have never been found, just as he stated. There's real weight to these confessions, disturbing as that is, and the specificity made it possible to link him, at least tentatively, to so many forgotten souls. But there was one more twist. His artwork became part of the evidence trail.
This is a haunting chapter, literally. Little produced dozens of portraits of his victims from memory, using pencils and pastels in his cell. The faces are so disturbingly vivid, and the FBI took the unprecedented step of releasing those sketches to the public, hoping to match them to Jane Doe's or missing persons cases. Law enforcement agencies across the country found links based entirely on these images. It's almost hard to wrap your head around.
It is. Honestly, seeing that gallery of faces, each hand-drawn with meticulous, almost loving care, it's jarring. Sometimes I think the only other place I've seen such evocative victim lists was in old homicide logs. But even those feel clinical by comparison. Each sketch is a reminder of a life the system tried for a long time not to see. And we have to ask ourselves, why did it take his art for these women to get noticed?
There's just something so eerie about the fact that for some families, these drawings were a first step towards justice or even closure. But it shouldn't be up to a killer's memory to give victims their names back.
That's the reality of it, though. Creepy as it sounds, those portraits are still being used to match cold cases. Now, Little's art is evidence, too, in the long trail he left behind.
When he was finally convicted, Little was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. He spent his final years, frankly, as a very frail prisoner, wheelchair-bound, suffering from diabetes and heart problems. What's really strange, though, is that those years saw him cooperating, trading confessions with authorities in exchange for more comfortable prison transfers. It's a very odd attempt at, well, legacy, maybe?
Yeah, it's almost like, in the end, his only remaining power was this information he held. These stories only he could confirm, confessions as currency. He died in December 2020, age 80, with no foul play suspected. Cause of death officially undisclosed, but his health was in sharp decline for years. The final chapter almost seemed anticlimactic compared to the scope and darkness of what came before.
But the questions, so many of them, remain. There's no tidy ending to a case with this many unknowns and lost names.
That's right. Even with the largest serial killer investigation in American history, dozens of Little's confessions remain uncorroborated. Many victims never identified, remains never found. It points to systemic failures. Failures in tracking violence against marginalized women, failures in connecting patterns across jurisdictions, failures in caring. What lessons can we take from this, Emily?
For me, it's about vigilance and empathy. Authorities have to do better. Investigate every case, regardless of the victim's station. We can't keep treating vulnerable lives as disposable. It also means building networks, sharing forensics, data, even something as basic as police records, so patterns are caught earlier next time. If, heaven forbid, there is a next time.
And we have to keep asking, who speaks for the victims? Who makes noise for the women the world tried not to see? If Little's legacy teaches us anything, it's that silence and indifference are a killer's best friend.
Absolutely. And James, I think it's our job, everyone's job, really, to make sure these stories remain visible, that the questions don't stop here, that people remember not just the killer's name, but the people whose voices were lost.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Emily. That's all for this episode, but there's still more to explore in the world of criminal justice, and more voices yet to be heard. Thanks for joining me again.